of Oz, we've got almost every military branch, Army, Navy, Coast Guard, that has now barred TikTok from government devices. We've got our national security agencies that have taken the same type of action. Even the RNC and the DNC campaign arms have warned their politicians about using it, and yet it continues to proliferate. In fact, I'll be testifying later this week at a House hearing where we talk about TikTok in the context of the military, in the sense that it's still very, very popular, even though it's banned from official devices. There's sort of a viral sort of meme on TikTok where they're telling people to upload videos inside their barracks, and they have that stuff uploaded from around the world, not just multiple U.S. installations, but the UK, Kuwait, you name it. And it's one of the most popular things on TikTok is videos of U.S. military equipment. People jumping out of airplanes, and it's fun. It's like breathtaking stuff. And again, it's multiple fold. It's one, what are people seeing once that stuff is viral and going up there? Two, what is all the data that's being pulled, location, otherwise, while that recording is taking place? And to your point, what sort of foreign influence is going on once they're getting deeply embedded with influencers that are part of the U.S. military? So it's concerning, and we got to move faster at the federal government. Again, there's a process being run out of Treasury right now called CFIUS that's looking at this. The Commerce Department has its own process that's looking at this. And then just recently, two stalwarts of national security, Senator Mark Warner, Democrat, Republican, Marco Rubio, the chair and vice chair of Senate Intel, wrote to the Federal Trade Commission, basically raising the same set of concerns I did in my letter to Apple and Google, and said, we think there's been misrepresentations about data flows. We want the FTC to investigate. So we've got a bright spotlight on it here in DC, but we got to go faster. We can't just sort of have the status quo of data going back to China. We got to get going. Trump raised this a couple of years ago, but all things Trump, you either, we're all in or all against it. But now it feels different. It feels like we're getting some thoughtful, bipartisan appreciation for the threat that TikTok presents.
If our military has banned it, should that not be just a snap auto ban and an easy layup for the Biden administration to say, listen, I know you love this app, and this functionality now exists in a bunch of other places, so you can go use those other platforms. And I'm sorry if you've fallen in love and are addicted to the app. We understand it's a delightful app, but this is a national security risk, and I need to do an executive order to tell Google and Apple to ban it. That's what should happen right now, isn't it?
That's what I think should happen. I mean, look, India, the world's largest democracy, has taken that action. Now, maybe you could say, well, there's some unique situations between India and China, given, border disputes and whatnot. Maybe that sort of influenced that as well. But yeah, I think that's where we should be at. I mean, again, we've taken hard action on Huawei and ZTE. But again, a lot of this stuff, when you scratch below the surface, there's still some holes there. Like, even most people assume Huawei is booted out of this country. Not so. What we did at the FCC was we prevented, with this federal subsidy program that we use to support internet builds in rural communities, almost all of the Huawei gear was being funded through that initiative, and we cut Huawei off so you don't get any more funding. But there's a loophole where you can use private sector dollars, buy the same Huawei equipment, and put it in the same point in the U.S. networks. And so I sort of called for closing that loophole. In fact, Congress gave us some additional authorities at the FCC to do that, and we're close to finishing up a rulemaking there. But I mean, this has been a really big effort to turn the ship with respect to our approach to China. And yeah, I don't think we're moving fast enough. Maybe that's because of business interests. Maybe it's because of supply chains. We don't want to see retribution there, but we got to get going.
The FBI has been incredibly concerned about election interference. And the Mueller report made it super clear what was happening. We could debate, is Trump, I know a lot of people have some beliefs that this was like fake news, but the fact is the Russians are trying to influence every election and trying to create chaos on all sides. That is something we cannot dispute. So if we know that is happening with the Russians, and our true rival in the world on the global stage is China, and will be going forward, and that's the most acute issue for us on a foreign policy basis, clearly, and will be for some time. Do we not think that election interference alone and that possibility is out there for the Chinese government to say, you know what, we're just going to tweak the algorithm and make this candidate do better, because this candidate will have more China-friendly policies, or we want to distract America, so therefore we'll take something like race, abortion, gun control, things that we have a very hard time dealing with as a country, and we're going to dial those up. Is that not the obvious reality that we're going to be facing in the next election?
Yeah, I think that's a real concern about foreign influence campaigns. And if my memory's right, there was some election, I can't remember, in New York, and one of the candidates either was an outspoken sort of critic of the Tiananmen Square crackdown or otherwise, and we saw sort of evidence of China sort of weighing in and trying to put a thumb on the scale against them. I'm not saying that was a TikTok effort, but yeah, I mean, once you have these things in people's pockets, once people have people's eyeballs on these screens, who knows what can happen. We have rules at the FCC. If you want to buy a broadcast TV station, one, you can't reach 100% of the population because we have rules that limit the percentage of the population that any one person can reach through a broadcast radio or broadcast TV. And two, we obviously do a very sort of studious foreign influence, foreign holdings review. And frankly, I think that's what, CFIUS should be doing as well, is taking a look at that serious potential for sort of foreign influence operations through TikTok.
If you were going to build the perfect app to do an influence campaign, the obvious way to do that would be to make it delightful and very light and fun and playful. And if it's become that popular and that's what it's known for, wouldn't that also indicate that that's the perfect cover for a nefarious app? And how much does the popularity make your job harder?
Yeah. I mean, look, the sort of product placement analogy, right? Sort of, putting a can of Pepsi in a movie and making you want to buy it is oftentimes more, persuasive than, the direct beating you over the head to buy something. And that's certainly something you can accomplish through TikTok. And it's a challenge. Again, most people just look at this and like, I don't get it. Like, it's just my cat video. There's no espionage value in it. And they don't understand that underlying data that's there. And again, if you're just, one parent and one kid, is there a lot of value to China having that? I don't know. But again, when we have millions and millions of Americans that have downloaded these and they're getting all of that data and they can, speak directly to them, that's a big risk.
An easy way to test this would be for Americans to try to trend Tiananmen Square on the app.
Yeah, I'm not on TikTok, but people tell me, yeah, if you search for certain things on TikTok or other social media, it's a very distorted perception feedback that you get back.
So if we ran advertisements to discuss Tiananmen Square and the plight of the Uyghurs, if Amnesty International bought an ad campaign, Human Rights Watch, the UN, we could really test, a number of these this year. So I'd encourage the audience, if they would like to test this, to put up some videos about the Uyghurs, put up videos about Tiananmen Square, and talk about human rights violations in China, Hong Kong, which you will have a never-ending stream of them. In fact, I'm going to start doing that as part of this.
Well, make sure you use a burner phone for that. I don't want you, getting your data sucked back into Beijing.
Exactly. I will literally do that on an Android burner phone. How does the Chinese government's approach to regulating their own citizens through smart devices and apps inform how we should think about what they would do here?
Look, they're right now amassing probably the world's most sophisticated data collection and AI operation, for one and only purpose, which is to keep the CCP in power. And the idea that, we're going to feed millions of data on millions of Americans back into that AI machine, I think is just, unconscionable in my mind. And yet, we're here. I mean, again, this is not like, people say, oh, well, Google's getting all this. And look, I got my concerns with that. I mean, you got, barometric pressure devices that know, when a car door closes or what floor you are in a building. There's some challenges with data collection in the US by Silicon Valley, and Congress is thinking about, some national standards there. But again, there's capitalism, there's profit motive, love it or hate it. That's largely what's going on there. That's not taking place. The only reason why ByteDance exists in China is because they are, helping the CCP to stay in power. And if they weren't, they wouldn't be there. In fact, we've seen over the last year or two, the Chinese government has really sort of reined in a lot of their technology companies to make sure that they can stay under their control and not, pursue other interests.
The analogy for people to think about would be, what if Trump or Biden owned all the data on Google and had free access to it and had the influence over the algorithm for Google search, or the algorithm for YouTube, or the algorithm for Facebook and Instagram. That's the analogy we're talking about here. And that's where people, I think, get tripped up. Sure, both of these companies have algorithms, both of them have data, but both cohorts of companies have perhaps too much data. But one of them is controlled and at the behest of the Chinese Communist Party. And here in America, Google will fight you. You have to fight with Google over getting data. The government agencies, if the FBI wants something from Google, they have to file through a judge and a court to get that information, correct?
Yeah, you're right. There's a pretty robust process of, subpoenas, and Google and everybody has these transparency reports. You can look, they get, hundreds of thousands of requests from the US government for data, whether it's Congress or a national security agency. And by and large, they push back. They fight, they defend their users' rights. That doesn't exist in China. It is a national security law that's no court review, no independent anything. Once that data gets inside of China, Katie barred the doors. It goes right to the CCP.
Who are you coming up against as friction for your position? When I saw it, I said, hey, this is a bold step. You must have gotten blowback. Is there blowback from one political party or the other? Is there blowback from certain agencies? Is there blowback from lobbying? And then, let's answer that one. Who's giving you resistance? And then who's giving you support?
Well, I asked for responses from Google and Apple for last Friday. They both said they weren't able to put something together by Friday, but I do still expect to get a response from them. Some of the pushback has been, well, you're just a single FCC commissioner. Your letter isn't official government action, meaning that it's not an official action of the FCC, which requires a vote of all of us. You don't have legal authority to compel Google and Apple to do this. Or they've said, you shouldn't tell a private business what to do, which generally I agree with. But, in the context of national security, I think it's entirely appropriate that all of us speak up. I mean, not to be glib about it, but we say in national security, see something, say something. And I did. And so I did. And so we'll see what Google and Apple say. Again, they're deep supply chains into China. I understand we'll put them in a tough spot here. My fellow FCC colleagues, I've spoken to all of them about this issue. And, I guess their view, potentially not speaking for them, is that, well, maybe it's not core FCC the way Huawei and ZTE were, because those were FCC fundings, or China Mobile, which was an FCC license. But I'm more than happy to sort of recede and let the Federal Trade Commission, take the lead pursuant to that letter from Senators Warner and Rubio. So some of the pushback has just been about, who are you at the FCC? Why don't you focus more on, this other stuff? And my view is, I'm a guy that, understands data flows into China because of my work here. And I'm going to speak out when I see an issue.
Do the other three commissioners support you? If it was put to a vote, would they vote yes or no?
I don't know. I don't know where they would come down. I mean, again, it's not something that's in our wheelhouse of direct regulatory authority the way Huawei, ZTE, or China Mobile is.
Got it. Okay.
But as a general matter, look, pushing back on CCP is a rare bipartisan issue in D.C. Schumer was on a letter a couple years ago with Tom Cotton raising concerns about TikTok. We've followed through with some tough actions on various entities tied to China. So I don't sense any softness inside the FCC. Any pushback would probably be, do we have direct enough regulatory authority to do something?
Conspiracy theory out there is the Facebooks of the world are trying to ankle TikTok. Your thoughts?
I saw that. It's pretty funny. I mean, I lodged more than my fair share of criticism at Facebook and their practices. But, for me, this is simply an extension of what we've done on Huawei, on ZTE, and the BuzzFeed news reporting. So
great. DJI drones. Maybe we could pivot to that for a quick moment, if you have time.
Yeah, I'm concerned about that as well. I mean, look, it to some extent, it's very similar to what's going on with TikTok, in the sense that these are very sophisticated platforms. And so I put out a call almost a year ago now, again, asking our national security agencies to give a thumbs up or thumbs down with their final view. I think there's enough there for me to be concerned. They obviously can collect everything from, facial recognition to body temperatures to high resolution images. Some people say, well, this isn't really any different than Google Earth. And I'd say, well, it is. It's much more high resolution when you can get the serial numbers off of telecom equipment with a DJI drone, which you can't get, from Google Earth. So I think that's another area where we need to be very careful. And again, we got to be definitive. If the Biden administration or the national security agencies don't think there's a problem there. Let's be clear and definitive about that. But this gray area where we're looking into concerns, but we're not saying anything, I don't think that's where we should be.
If Apple were to take TikTok out of the App Store, would there be blowback on their ability to make phones and sell them in China?
I think there probably would be. Again, we haven't seen too much retribution with our actions on Huawei's ZTE, but again, that was sort of a pure FCC action rather than a private sector entity doing it. And I have no doubt that they would see some pushback. But long term, I just think we got to start moving these investments, moving this supply chain out of China. I mean, I sent a separate letter to Apple maybe a month or two ago. Tim Cook came here to DC and gave this really great flowery speech about how Apple stands up for human rights and privacy. And at the same time, they're actively sort of removing apps from the Chinese version of the App Store that the CCP doesn't want, including ones that include, VPNs and sort of privacy protections. And so I think long run, we've got to square this circle of our positions on human rights and freedom here in the U.S. And how do you square that with continuing to do business with the CCP, which in my view, and in fact, even the Biden administration's view, is continuing to engage in a genocide campaign against Uyghurs. So yeah, I think we've got a direction. We also have some, infrastructure laws right now that have Buy America provisions in them. And some of the companies are pushing back and they're saying, look, we just don't have, the fiber supply, the chipsets to do this massive infrastructure build with only American companies. Can we get waivers of that? And this, again, isn't a direct FCC issue, but my view would be, to the extent you're right, that we don't have that available, not just in the US, but somewhere outside of China, that's a problem. And if you want a waiver, maybe my view would be you can have a waiver limited and conditioned on you sort of coming up with an aggressive timeline for getting your supply chain out of China over 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, or something like that.
Yeah, it seems clear that we're going to have some resiliency in our supply chain. Japan is, as you know, and other countries are now subsidizing, and we have the CHIPS Act that is in the news right now for helping companies, even though it'd be more expensive to be in other locations, reduce our dependency for critical infrastructure items like chips. And obviously we have drugs and other things that we need to be absolutely resilient on, because these are communist countries. These are dictatorships, as we're watching with Ukraine and Russia's war in the Ukraine and their invasion of the Ukraine. You really cannot predict what these dictators will do. And you can, as Germany is learning some hard lessons, you cannot be dependent on them because they're unpredictable and they will use that dependency against you.
Yeah, you're right. And I think particularly with, the threats that China is making towards Taiwan, we need to be very clear, I think, upfront to China what those consequences are. With Russia and Ukraine, I mean, Russia doesn't have a lot of, FCC approved entities or anything like that, but there's no piece of electronics equipment that is allowed to be used in this country that doesn't go through the FCC's equipment authorization process. I mean, just look at any device around you, there's sort of some sort of FCC stamp on it. I think we should publicize a list of every entity with an FCC equipment authorization or license with ties to communist China and publish that list and say, look, if you make a move on Taiwan, I mean, there's going to be very serious economic consequences that come to you. And I just think we need to continue to deepen our relationships there with Taiwan. On the FCC side as well, we play a role in authorizing Starlink, and they played a great role in Ukraine as well. Because one of the things that we've seen, we saw this in Cuba as well, is when you see freedom movements around the world, the first thing that people do now is they raise their smartphone, they take pictures, they take videos, it shoots around the world, it galvanizes support. The first thing that an authoritarian regime does is they shut down the internet. They don't turn the internet off entirely. They have, sophisticated ways of identifying, chats and messages and stopping that stuff from getting out. And I think Starlink and other technologies are a great way of preventing authoritarian regimes from shutting down those the internet. And I raise it now because this week is the 1 year anniversary since those massive Cuban protests that we saw last summer.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, Tiananmen Square and the Tank Man, that one video changed a great perception of what was going on in China. If you don't know what the Tank Man video is, and you're under the age of 40, you can go just type that in, and you won't be able to see it if you're in China, but you'll be able to see it everywhere else of a man standing in front of a tank. Tell me more about Starlink and there's obviously 2 or 3 other competing products coming. what impact could that have on communication freedom, in communist countries around the world? Maybe you
Yeah,
can expand on that a bit.
I think it's really interesting technology. I mean, a lot of people, not you, but a lot of people think of these, satellite technologies. They think of the original systems, which were these, school bus size satellites located far away from Earth, high, latency that didn't, make sense for internet connectivity. But these new generations of low Earth orbit satellites are really providing remarkable speeds and throughput. We're excited about it at the FCC. It's not the solution for 100% of the country. A lot of politicians in DC will say, well, great, we spend over $10 billion a year right now subsidizing rural internet. Let's just shift everybody over to Starlink and stop spending $10 billion. But the Starlink system can't handle the entire U.S. population. So there's going to be an important role for it, particularly in rural America. But to your point, more broadly, you look at Cuba, you look at Ukraine, there's a real need for the ability to stay connected either when terrestrial networks in Ukraine are damaged, or in Cuba when there's an authoritarian that shuts it down. And so, look, we've long seen that, the free flow of information over the modern means of communication accelerates the downfall of those that govern without the consent of the people. And this started with, leaflets back in the revolutionary era. We had, radio-free Europe. In fact, right now we continue to send radio signals into Cuba. And the modern day version of that is the internet. And so I've long said that we need the strategic capability, I think Starlink and others can be a part of that, of standing up robust internet services in foreign countries.
Wow. So I wonder what the response would be from Russia or China if we were to send, or Saudi Arabia, or a Middle Eastern country, if we were to fly a sortie of low Earth orbit satellites, I'll leave Starlink out, but these could be government ones, over those countries, and said, hey, with this, and sneak in some on the ground, some satellite receivers, hey, here's your internet, go, and all of a sudden or long distance Wi-Fi, whatever, however it's done.
Yeah.
This could be just groundbreaking in terms of the impact it would have.
Yeah, there's some interesting technologies. When we were looking at Cuba last summer, one of the ideas that I floated, there's a technology that you can use high altitude balloons, stratospheric platforms. And we approved those at the FCC for Puerto Rico after a 2017 hurricane took out the island's communication network. There was a handful of balloons that would, circle around the island, and you can beam directly from a stratospheric balloon to someone's smartphone. You can tether similar balloons to ship international waters to get to the island as well. And that made sense for Cuba. That's more challenging, obviously, for Ukraine. But yeah, I mean, look, we've been pushing this for a while. There's certainly some State Department concerns. And apart from any sort of individual deployment like that, there is still a concern that I have about low Earth orbit generally getting jammed up. China is not, beyond sending up a rocket and blowing up one of their satellites, and it can cause a very serious cascading effect in low Earth orbit. So, there's very, very high upside to these constellations. They have high maneuverability to deal with issues like that, but there's still sort of a fundamental challenge if Russia or China decides to,
it would be seen as a hostile act by them if we were to do that. And they might take a very aggressive response, and that response might be going into space and blowing up satellites.
Right.
That nobody wants that. I mean, it's one thing to send a radio signal in, but it's not, the proportionality of this tells you everything you need to know. They're afraid to have their people know the truth, and they would start a war over them, knowing exactly how horrific their reign of terror has been inside their own countries. Listen, I really appreciate you, Brendan, coming on and being so honest. I appreciate the work you're doing and standing up for, what is, to me, one of the most confounding things I've seen. I know there are some Americans who are disappointed with some aspects of our country or our government or agencies, but I think all Americans need to understand the existential risk we are facing with communist countries and their ability to track our children or to change sentiment in this country. These platforms are incredibly powerful. TikTok is unbelievably powerful. It is not what you think you're using when you see cat videos or dance videos. That's the content we're creating. That's not the data they're collecting. These are two distinctly different things, and you need only look at their track record to understand if you should give them the benefit of the doubt. They have 1 million people in concentration camps as we
Yep.
speak. It is not a debatable subject. And if you buy the wrong book or you use a VPN in China, you will be re-educated, which is translation for raped, beaten, tortured, and imprisoned until you, change your position. So this is a pretty sadistic and insane group of people that we're dealing with, and there is absolutely no justification for taking the risk. And why would we give this business to them anyway? We should kick them out of the country. We should do that now. There's plenty of other platforms that will make a delightful app. Thank you so much, Brendan, for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate it. Enjoyed doing the pod with you. Thanks for all the work that you're doing. I'm an avid listener to all the stuff that you do. I learn a
Thanks,
lot.
Phil.
It's interesting to hear your voice in actual real-time speed. I listen to my podcast at 1.5. So you sound just as good in normal speed than 1.5 speed.
Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate it. Keep up the hard work, and we'll see you next time. We'll have you on again. Hopefully we get some resolution